Welcome to Colorado State University's podcast, The Audit, where host Stacy Nick talks with CSU faculty about topics ranging from their latest research to current events.
The character Forrest Gump would say, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. But if you're Colorado State University researcher Caitlin Clark, you know exactly what you're going to get, at least when it comes to the chocolates. Clark is a senior food scientist at CSU Spur Campus in the Food Innovation Center. Her research focuses on two things, fermented foods and chocolate. Occasionally, she even studies them at the same time. So as we near Valentine's Day, the unofficial chocolate holiday, we thought we'd talk to Clark about the science behind this beloved treat, why we love it, and why we should be paying more attention to how it's being made and where it's coming from. I think if I was going to be a food scientist, focusing on chocolate would be a definite place I would start.
It's the best.
Tell me a little bit about your path into food science and fermentation and then finally to chocolate.
I didn't start out as a food scientist. I was a linguist before, but I was living in Madrid and traveling all over the Mediterranean and was just having all these fun food experiences that I thought of as just fun at the time. I had no idea that I could turn it into work. And a lot of them were with what I now understand were fermented foods. I didn't really think of it that way at the time, but I was making sausage and cheese and wine and just all these neat things. And so all these experiences were just kind of accumulating. And then one day I was at a market, like a Christmas market, and the local university, it was in Cartagena in the south of Spain. They had a booth there for their food science program. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize food science was a thing. And I went home and told my husband at the time that same day, I need to go back to grad school and be a food scientist. And then it all happened really fast after that. I moved back to the States and I still had my Colorado residency. So I was looking for a university in Colorado, and Colorado State just had started the food science program with the fermentation concentration. So I went and visited and thought it looked great, and I applied, and then 10 years later, here I am.
And how did that go from fermentation to chocolate?
When I came back, I actually intended to work in dairy. I was interested in cheese making because I had worked on a bunch of goat farms, and that included a lot of cheese making with the goat milk. And I just happened to be walking around Fort Collins, just getting familiar with it because I had just moved there for school. And Nuance Chocolate had just opened up. Nuance, if you're not familiar with it, is just a great little chocolate shop in downtown Fort Collins. Toby and Alex run it and they make great chocolate. But they had just opened like a few months prior to that. And we got to chatting and Toby mentioned that chocolate's a fermented food. And I didn't know that. And I had all these questions about it because I was obviously like into fermentation and wanted to talk to someone about fermentation. And he just kept saying, we don't know. I don't know. Nobody knows that. And I was like, how does no one know this stuff, right? Like chocolate's this popular product. And sure enough, as I went to research it more, there was a whole bunch of stuff that we don't know about chocolate fermentation. And so I was just hooked. I wanted to study it.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you think of fermented foods, you think of kimchi or yogurt, those kinds of things. You don't think of chocolate. So where does fermentation enter the process for chocolate?
You're right. It is not what we kind of typically think of. And I think that's because like with most fermented products that come to mind when you say fermentation, like you said, kimchi or yogurt, we're eating something that is live and active in the fermentation, and we're interacting with the direct results of the fermentation process. And with chocolate, that's not true. We're interacting with far down the line byproducts of the fermentation process. So with chocolate, it grows on this tree in kind of these football-shaped pods. And when the pods are cracked open, the seeds, which is what we call cacao beans, they're really the seeds of this tree, which are surrounded by this kind of pulp of the fruit. The pulp and the seeds are all scooped out into this huge mass in these boxes. And that's where the fermentation actually happens. So it's really the pulp that ferments initially. The pulp is full of sugar. It's delicious if you ever get a chance to taste it. It's really sweet. So it ferments at first with yeast. just like wine. And in fact, some people do make wine out of the pulp of the cacao tree. So it ferments by converting the sugars in the pulp into alcohol. And there's some other things that happen too. Some of the pectins are breaking down, but mostly it's that sugar to alcohol pathway. So it's essentially kind of like making wine right there in the box. After a couple days, though, some bacteria come in and take over. It's a lot of what we call acetic acid bacteria, which is the same bacteria that make vinegar, another fermented food. Also, they're really prevalent in kombucha. And they come in and convert that alcohol that the yeast produced into acids. And the acids that they produce seep into the cacao seed, the bean, and cause a bunch of biochemical changes and physical changes that really turn it into what we can use to make chocolate. And if that didn't happen, it wouldn't be a material that we could use to make something we recognize as chocolate. It requires that fermentation step that produces those acids that seep in. And then sometimes at the very end, there's a step with some additional organisms, sometimes bacillus, sometimes some fungi. Depends a lot on the location and the specifics of the fermentation. Then after that, the beans are dried under the sun. And then of course, in later steps, there's roasting and all sorts of things. So the microbes actually don't survive into the chocolate. That's where it's different from products like yogurt or cheese, where we're used to consuming products that contain the fermentative organisms, and chocolate doesn't.
Gives you a very different way to look at chocolate. We think about the roasting, we think about the melting, we think about those things, but fermentation is a process that no one really connects the dots to. Along the same lines with the science behind chocolate, if you asked me why I like chocolate, I probably wouldn't be able to put a finger on a specific reason. I just like it. Is there a scientific reason behind why so many people love chocolate? What is the science behind that?
Yeah, I mean, how do you study deliciousness, right? So a few factors. Its flavor is highly complex. One of the most complex foods that we know of, and that largely comes from the fermentation. The fermentation results in so many of these precursor compounds that then later when we roast the chocolate, those compounds get converted into what we then taste in the final chocolate. And there are just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, more than we find in coffee or wine or other foods that we think of as high complexity, very flavorful. So in chocolate, there's a lot to stimulate our senses. So that's one component of it. Another one is the sugar and the fat, right? There's a lot of sugar, there's a lot of fat in chocolate, and those are things that our brains are driven to appreciate. Another component is chocolate contains methylxanthines. So caffeine is one, and that's also in some other products like coffee, but chocolate also contains a methylxanthine called theobromine, which is similar in structure to caffeine, but it functions a little differently. It doesn't have such a sharp stimulating property. It has kind of a gentler lift, and the benefit that some people get from it, there's some evidence that it's part of the addictive feature of chocolate.
I knew it. I knew it was addictive.
Right. Yeah, when you put all those things together, it goes a long way towards describing why some people find chocolate hard to eliminate from their diet.
And why would they want to?
Exactly.
Now, over at Spur, you have started a chocolate lab. Tell me a little bit more about that, because I think that's a science lab that everyone would want to hang out in.
Yeah, my chocolate lab is still very small. We just wanted some small equipment so we could do some experiments. And also because we sometimes work with clients who are small bean to batch chocolate producers, or who have some feature of their product that involves chocolate. And we wanted to be able to respond to those needs. But also we recognize that a big part of what we do is interfacing with the public. And we're trying to generate interest in food science as a discipline, but also in food and agriculture in the world, and getting people to relate to those ideas with something that might be meaningful or important to them. And also just like showing people possible careers that they can have. And so the chocolate is just a great way to do all those things, and also show people a lot of science, because chocolate isn't only food science, but it's great to demonstrate mechanical engineering principles and physics and other aspects of chemistry. And so there's a lot you can do with it outside of our regular work of just working with clients. So we can only actually produce pretty small volumes, but it lets us test different variables of how things work. And it also is going to let me bring in people for workshops or classes. And we haven't started offering that yet. We're still figuring out what we could put together. I've thought about doing like a truffle making class or a make your own bar / learn about chocolate class. Those are some of the directions that we'd like to take that lab.
Are there specific issues that you'll be researching with chocolate? Please tell me it's a calorie-free chocolate that tastes exactly like the real thing.
Guilt-free. You can eat as much of it as you want. Yeah, that's my goal. No, we have some research ideas, but research is probably not our top priority right now. Some things that we've heard interest in, people are interested in figuring out how to get fiber into chocolate, how to get protein, maybe plant proteins into chocolate. People are interested in combining chocolate with non-chocolate components to make something that can then still be made into a bar, to maybe reduce the total quantity of chocolate that's actually being used, but still get the benefit of chocolate in terms of its flavor, but also those like addictive properties that we talked about earlier. Those are some things that we've heard interest in from clients or from other circles. And then I have a few other ideas that I would just like to toy with as well.
You know, it's interesting, the idea of adding fiber, because there is a healthy element to dark chocolate, right?
Yeah, in some cases, I think it's probably overrated. I think a lot of the polyphenols in most dark chocolate, especially like dark chocolate you buy in a grocery store, probably don't survive. And there have been some studies done where they've measured the total polyphenol content in various dark chocolate products. And the range you get is really wide. They're everywhere from 0 to, some reasonable numbers. It is true that dark chocolate probably has more benefit than milk chocolate. And also that the better quality dark chocolate that you buy, like if you were to go into Nuance and get a dark chocolate bar, you'd probably be getting some real health benefit from that in terms of flavanol content, polyphenol content, compared to one that you got at, say, the grocery store. But I think, honestly, the reason it kind of makes me smile is because I always want to tell people, like, just eat some blueberries. If that's what you're trying to get out of this, eat a handful of blueberries and then go eat any chocolate you want. Like, that's not why you should be eating the chocolate.
You're bursting so many bubbles right now.
I know. Sorry.
Going back to the chocolate lab, I'm wondering, will you be needing volunteers to do taste testing? Because I bet there are a lot of folks who would love to be guinea pigs for the chocolate lab.
Yeah, eventually we hope to be doing some taste testing. So we have here an amazing sensory scientist, Dr. Martha Calvert, and she runs our sensory lab, and we do all sorts of taste testing there. And sometimes we do it for clients, but we also sometimes do research projects or in-house projects. Martha and I have definitely been kicking around some ideas for things we could do in partnership with the chocolate lab, either just for fun or possibly for research purposes, to see if, for example, I want to test different roast profiles, but one roast profile maybe takes twice as long. Does that matter? Can people actually tell a difference? Do they actually like the one better that takes longer? Is it worth it to invest that time? Things like that will definitely be needing people to come in and do taste testing to get that data. I know Martha sends out, when she schedules a test, she sends out that schedule to her group of taste buds. Taste buds are people who have signed up to be notified about activity in the sensory lab. So anyone who wants to sign up for that could go onto the Spur website and look up the sensory lab and sign up on the taste buds spreadsheet. And then they would find out about things we do with chocolate, but also all the other cool stuff that Martha does in the sensory lab.
I think chocolate is one of those things that we don't think too much about the growing or the production process as much as maybe we could. I mean, maybe the average person listening to this is thinking, I don't care how it's made, I just want to eat it. But why should they care more about the process?
Great question. And that's definitely one of the reasons we have a chocolate lab in the first place, is because the agriculture part is part of our focus here. We want people to be thinking about that when they interact with chocolate as a product. Especially, I think people might be questioning it more now because chocolate prices have gone up so much. And people might be wondering why. And the reason for that is not really what's happening on the production side, it's what's happening on the agriculture side. And giving more visibility to that might help people understand and also have sympathy for the people who are on the ground in that respect. The agriculture part of chocolate is so important. It's also something that is hard to talk about in generalizations because it's done different ways all around the globe. And it's something that is often done incredibly poorly in ways that damage not only the environment, but also are damaging to people in a very direct sense. It's one of the industries where slave labor still does exist. And that's true. That's measurable. That it's not something that I'm hypothesizing or that we speculate about. It is known to be a fact that slaves, including slaves who are minors in the most literal sense of that word, are still put to use in the chocolate industry. And that's one reason why it has stayed so cheap for so long. Some of the other challenges in the industry are agriculture practices that have really harmed the environment, like slash and burn agriculture and other practices that are leading to deforestation. Increasingly, I think we're understanding how we can farm cacao in ways that avoid both human and environmental harm. And there are lots of places around the world that are doing a great job at that. The problem is it dramatically increases the price of the beans. And in order to accommodate those prices, people need to be willing to accept a higher price for chocolate. The sort of chain of logic here is that in order for people to accept those higher prices, they need to understand the hidden costs of what keeps those prices low. And understanding more about the agriculture side and how cacao can be farmed effectively and in a way that is actually healthy for the environment and the farmers themselves helps people understand why it needs to be that price instead of leading consumers to fight back against that, because it's all of us who lose if people aren't willing to pay those higher prices, not only the consumers who don't get to eat their chocolate, but also the producers in the Western world, like Toby and Alex at Nuance, who have people not wanting to purchase their product, but then also the growers who are losing their livelihood. So we also need to understand what's really going on here and find a balance where we're willing to accept the real cost of this product.
How much should a box of chocolates or a bar of chocolate actually cost?
A well-made chocolate bar, sourced ethically from high-quality beans, should reasonably cost something like $25. And that would probably be a cost that doesn't disguise many of the hidden costs. And you do see some nice places. White Label is probably selling their bars for around 20. Nuance is selling theirs in the 10 to 20 range. Quantu is selling theirs for around 15. It's like those prices are very reasonable for that quality of chocolate. And so the conclusion is chocolate isn't an everyday commodity. Chocolate is a luxury product, and that's how it should be priced.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that are having a little sticker shock right now because we are so used to it being $1 or $2.
I do feel like if people understood what they were paying for with that $2, not only in terms of the actual difference in the product itself versus a much nicer product, but also, again, all those hidden costs, people might be more willing to accept that chocolate isn't a daily commodity.
What do you think it would take for people to really get that idea?
I don't have a good answer here, but I think what's not helpful is lately there's been a movement to make chocolate out of things that aren't chocolate, out of rice bran, or to make something that imitates chocolate. I'm not sure whether that's helpful or not, but it seems to me like the messaging of those products, which are still not super widely available, the messaging has kind of been, you deserve your chocolate. And some other people are doing things wrong such that you can't get it, because a lot of the messaging is chocolate is bad for the environment. And so we're going to solve that problem by making chocolate that's not chocolate. And so then you can eat it guilt-free and you don't have to feel bad about the environment. And I think that's been a problem because the problem is not the environment. Chocolate's not bad for the environment when it's done properly. The problem is the system of incentives that leads to people farming it poorly because they're not properly supported and blah, 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 blah. So I guess I wish that there were a way we could sell those products in a way that's unrelated to chocolate. I don't have a problem with the products. I have a problem with that messaging. I think maybe there's a way this opens up a market space for products like that that provide a daily commodity level product that sort of satisfies the same place as chocolate. But I think it's harmful to use messaging that vilifies chocolate as we're opening up that space.
This idea of chocolate that's not chocolate. I'm wondering, in terms of trends, what is the next big thing that you're seeing in chocolate?
That's definitely probably the next big thing is people are doing cell cultured chocolate or chocolate made from spent grain or rice bran or anything that can kind of get those same Maillard compounds and get a similar taste. And some of it's good, some of it's not. It's all really chemically interesting and interesting from a food science perspective. So that's definitely a thing that's happening. And then another big trend in chocolate is the push to use chocolate as a health vehicle. So as we talked about, chocolate isn't a naturally probiotic food. The organisms involved in the fermentation are eliminated during processing, but there are people who are then adding back in probiotics to chocolate. There are people who are interested in doing like high fiber chocolate. And so just kind of using chocolate as a carrier for supplements or other health compounds.
Making chocolate healthy. That's the dream, right? I guess.
Not my game, but someone out there.
That was CSU Senior Food Scientist Caitlin Clark talking about the science behind chocolate. I'm your host, Stacey Nick, and you're listening to CSU's The Audit.